Good evening, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring classicist here, a wandering author, ready to remind you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to be talking about the final type of justice that Aristotle discusses in Book 5 of the Nicomachean Ethics, which is called reciprocity. Yesterday we talked about corrective justice, which is literally how we correct things whenever they go wrong. But this one is pretty interesting. This view is also held that reciprocity is justice. This was the doctrine of the Pythagoreans. And they defined the just simply as suffering reciprocally with one another. It is not the same exact thing as this distributive justice or corrective justice. And for in many cases, reciprocity is at variance with justice. So just because something is reciprocal, which means the same for each other. If something is reciprocal, it means that, like they're two halves of the same thing. But just because something is reciprocal doesn't mean that it's just. And Aristotle gives us a great example of that. For example, if an officer strikes a man, it is wrong for the man to strike him back. And if a man strikes an officer, it is not enough for the officer to strike him, but he ought to be punished as well. Literally, this type of justice is kind of like the eye for an eye type of thinking. I always like the follow-up quote that, if you really do go an eye for an eye, then the whole world goes blind. Aristotle kind of agrees with that. He doesn't agree that reciprocity is necessarily the same thing as justice in all cases. And he goes on further to say, it makes a great difference whether an act was done with or without the consent of the other party. We all know consent's very important. And then he kind of goes way out on the left field and starts talking like a revolutionary and says the very existence of the state depends on proportionate reciprocity. And this is a longer quote. I've got more here. It's hard to get everything on these on the whiteboard all at once. But he goes on to say that for men demand that they shall be able to requite evil with evil. And if they cannot, they feel they are in a position of slaves. So if you can't make things just, it makes people feel like they're slaves. And I would agree with that, or at the very least, not citizens. And Aristotle goes on to say, this is why we set up a shrine of the graces in a public place, to remind men to return a kindness. So this isn't just about bad things that happen. It could also be about returning kindnesses, for that is a special characteristic of grace. Now, proportionate requital is affected by diagonal conjunction. I'm not sure what he means by that, but I thought it was an interesting sentence, so I copied it. And he ends the chapter by talking kind of about money and how this right here is used in business. Hence, all commodities exchanged must be able to be compared in some way. It is to meet this requirement that men have introduced money. So the entire reason that we have money is so we can compare value between different things. Money constitutes in a manner a middle term, for it is a measure of all things, and so of their superior and inferior value. That is to say, how many shoes are equivalent to a house or to a given quantity of food, which I think this point is pretty significant. What he's saying is, money came about so we could compare the value between different things, and not just different things, but things that are dissimilar, things that are not similar at all, like shoes and a house. How many shoes are equal to a house? Well, it's hard to say, but if we can look at the money aspect, if we can look at their values in terms of dollars, it makes it a little easier to compare them. It is therefore necessary that all commodities shall be measured by some one standard, and this standard is in reality demand. #Adam Smith. which is what holds everything together. But demand has come to be conventionally represented by money. This is why money is called nomisma, and that right there is a Greek word which means customary currency, because it does not exist by nature, but by custom, nomos. Farmers and shoemakers have to have a way to equate their products, or an association won't be made. Unless people can actually compare the value between the goods they produce, they're not going to do business with each other. That is demand, which, by serving as a single standard, holds such an association together, is shown by the fact that when there is no demand for mutual service on the part of both, or at least one of the parties, no exchange takes place between them. So, demand is represented by money, and demand is what drives all economic activity. Now, money serves us as a guarantee of exchange in the future. Supposing we need nothing at the moment, it ensures that exchange shall be possible when a need arises. Money, it is true, is liable to the same fluctuation of demand as other commodities, for its purchasing power varies at different times. That's interesting to me. They had inflation and deflation back then too, and so Aristotle comments on it. He goes on to say that prices should be fixed to ensure exchange is always possible. Now, I'm not exactly a fan of price controls, but I guess at least in an ideal world, Aristotle thought they would be useful. And then he goes on to say that money lets us measure the value of things and compare them, and it makes exchange possible. This is what makes exchange possible, even if you cannot equate shoes and houses in a strict sense. There must therefore be some one standard, and this accepted by agreement, for such a standard makes all things commensurable, since all things can be measured by money. And it is clear that before money existed, this is how the rate of exchange was actually stated. 5 beds for a house. Yeah, so he does some more math in this one. And he goes, let A equal a house, let B equal 10 minae, which is like a coin that they used back in Aristotle's day. And then let C equal a bedstead. I always thought it was pronounced stand, but I looked it up and it's bedstead. And then he goes, let A equal B over 2. So let a house equal 5 minae. And let a bedstand equal 1 minae. So, what did we learn today, guys? We learned that beds were very expensive. It cost 5 beds for a house back in Aristotle's day. I mean, if this is a real example, but it seems reasonable. I mean, at least I don't understand why he would include that in there if it wasn't reasonable. Maybe it was way tougher to make beds back in the day, or maybe they lived in smaller houses. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you guys. This is Wandering Author here. What are you guys doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part. You can count on me to do mine daily. Till next time, love y'all.